we get started this evening, as John said, there's a table in the back. It's got some interesting books for ghost hunting. It's got some interesting books if you're looking for something for your little goblins for Christmas. Advertising done. There are also 2 books on the pedestals. One is 120 years old, 103 years old. The other one is about 160 years old. You are welcome to look at them. I've marked a couple places that I'll be referring to throughout the program. I think with that light off, you should be able to see all right. Everyone able to see? Cameras all right? Okay. Gary and his program committee said, we'd like you to do the October program, and we think it would be neat because it's Halloween if you did something about the cemetery. So, having done this program once before many, many years ago when we were still doing programs at the library, and I did it on the cemetery, I didn't want to do the same thing. So I got to thinking that there are a lot of ghosts that we have in our family history. We have interesting ghosts down at the cemetery. So name that ghost using the hints at the cemetery, in the local records, and online to add a name, hopefully, to your ghost hunt. First thing you need to know are the ghost hunter's tools. Map and a timeline, written records, a tape measure, camera is always helpful, paper, pen, pencil. Hopefully, as you develop your searches, you develop a 6th sense. It comes in very, very handy for reminding you where you have and haven't looked, or maybe turn around and look at something. And then we're going to talk about the written records, the official records, cemetery records, newspaper, and local records. Come on. Here we go. I hate technology some days. Okay, yeah, that's it. All right, cemetery timeline. No, I'm not nervous. In 1847, prior to 1847, there were the private farm cemeteries, of which we've got lots in Seneca County and all over the country. You also had your church cemeteries. 2 main ones that come to mind are the Baptist Church Cemetery, the McNeil Cemetery, and then there is the Baptist Church, or the Methodist Church Cemetery on one of the country roads up there as well. In 1847, New York State allowed for rural cemetery associations. Farmer, being farmer, decided to have 2, one North Cemetery Association and one South Cemetery Association. The North Cemetery Association was primarily members of the Reformed Church, and the South one were the members of the Baptist Church. So they purchased lands. The South Cemetery purchased lands up near the Baptist Church from William Rappley, and the North Cemetery purchased lands from Abram Ditmars. Mr. Ditmars' home is the main Pursoon family house at this point, and from that front porch he could actually, or his family could, look at the Ditmars family monument when they eventually put one up. But they purchased land from him, and it was the front portion of the cemetery. It was not the entire thing we have now. In 1849, they realized they needed more land. So they bought another piece, which gave us all of the land from the driveway east along that front fence, and just that front area. And then in 1860, South Cemetery realized they had an issue. They didn't have enough land, they didn't have enough people, but rather than build on, the ministers of the community suggested that they join with the North Cemetery Association. So in 1861, they bought another 5 acres. 1865, after the merger, they bought an additional 5 acres, which gave us the size of the cemetery as we have it now, until 1983 or 4, when we bought from John and Gary and the Hunt family the strip along the back side of the cemetery. So what you have here is, this is the 1847 purchase. And this becomes critical, or at least interesting, when you start doing some of your ghost hunting. This is the 1860 purchase, and this is the latter purchase. We have some maps where this corner isn't even marked out, and a lot of these lots are listed in that one book that I've got with me, but they aren't given any names. I hate technology. Okay, official records, because you can't jump into the other stuff without understanding this. Before 1882, there are very, very few official records of birth, marriages, and deaths. Official being kept by an official of the state. You have some in the surrogate court records or the land records. You also have church records. In 1847 to 1849, there are some local records. Some of these are with the town clerk. I believe Walt has the complete set, complete in that not every town kept them or turned them in, but I believe he has some of the 1847 to 1849 birth, marriage, and death records, which are quite interesting, challenging to read and understand. 1860s lot owner's book, which is the one back there, it's the thinner volume. That tells us who was buying lots, when they bought them, and occasionally there's some other notes in them. 1882. This is the date that all of us that do genealogy and get genealogy questions need to remember. That's when New York State said, okay, you're going to record births, marriages, and deaths. Births and deaths are recorded in the location where they happened. Your marriage record could be recorded any place within the state. So that gets to be a challenge. By the late 1880s, most locations were doing full registration of birth, marriages, and deaths. Occasionally, the physician would wander in and he would do a year's worth of babies and register them. So if you're looking, make sure you look through everything, if you can look yourself or remind the town clerk of that fact. The death record includes the location of burial. It does not say lot 710 or whatever, but it says Interlaken or Farmer Cemetery, Trumansburg, wherever the burial was going to be happening. In 1917, burial permits have started to be used, and we have those for the town of Covert, and a number of the other communities have them, because as I was helping do record inventories, I know a number of the places had varying collections of them. And then in December 1917 is when that book back there behind Doris begins. The fact that it starts in December of 1917 is a good indication to me that someplace, somewhere along the line, there was a previous book, but it never got passed on. I would love for it to show up one day, because it would have a lot of answers. Why do you need a tape measure? Actually, the question more is, how large is the lot? And we're going to be looking at a number of these. George Raymond lot is this one right here. Note that it says 125 on it. So doesn't the lot two down from it. When they copied and made this map, they listed 125 and 126 twice. We have them right in the records at the cemetery, but that's an interesting little thing. And for those of you that recognize old names, there's Nivison, but it's spelled with a K. And there's several names in the community where they have that extra K in front of it. But George Raymond's lot is 25 by 11. 25 feet this way, 11 feet this way. This is to allow for the burial and the headstone and a little bit of walking room. The Miller lot here is only 20 feet by 11 feet, And the Patrick lot way down here is actually a 20 by 20. Prior to the 1940s, 1950s, a 20 by 20 or a 20-foot length will give you space to safely put 5 full burials. It's not until the 1940s and the 50s that they started using a vault. So you didn't want to be digging right next to an old burial. It has a tendency to collapse and all of that stuff. So you could, on the Patrick lot, put 10 full burials. Today, on a 20 by 20, we can actually put 12 full burials because we put the vaults in there and they're side by side and they support the earth. The top section is right beside the road. This bottom section, you'll notice way over here on the side, that is the Rappley Circle, and the Rappley Circle is right there, sort of behind the vault. If you've been down to the cemetery, you probably know it quite well. Corner markers. Corner markers in family lots. Actually, I must be double pushing the button here. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 corner markers. In this case, they're very noticeable. They stand up nice and tall. You have to mow around them. You can't run over them. That is actually a double lot at least. Corner markers. Where there is one, there should be others. Oftentimes, when you're out looking in the cemetery, you will find one little corner marker someplace. If you find one, and you know the size of the lot, you should be able to find more of them. And when I was looking, I actually came up, that one was there, and then I was able to find the other 2, so that we have the size of the lot. And this lot in particular, again, the orange cones are marking the site of the 4 corners, and this one in particular ties in with that. And then Gary can answer this question. All those bushes, are they needed? That question's been asked of me many, many times in the 25 years I've been a part of the cemetery, and every time I give them the same answer: no, you can't take them out. Every one of those bushes, and all of the ones that were there before, are corner markers. When they planted all those spirea bushes, they were planted at the corners of the lots. And the lots themselves will have space, some of the lots will have spaces between them so that you can carry the casket down without having to necessarily walk on other people's. And these 2 shots are taken from up by the main road.
Diane, is that in addition to or a substitute for stone corner block?
This is the landscaping that was done by the cemetery, and then individuals bought and put in the stone corner markers. So this is the cemetery, and then they added the corner ones too. So hopefully, if you find a couple, go digging around the base of the bush and you should find potentially. But corner markers are usually, other than the ones I showed you, close to the ground, right at ground level, and so as people have walked over them, as mowers and as backhoes have run over them, they will get pushed into the ground, so that's why you have to dig them up, dig around for them. If you go digging for one, put the dirt back. Especially down at Lakeview, we have volunteer mowers and they dislike those ruts. Having established that, let's go talking about ghosts and look at a few. Back when I first started at the cemetery and was looking around and trying to get an understanding of where things were, I found that marker in the upper corner. Miles, M-Y-L-E-S. Is it a first name? Is it a last name? Do we know? Here's Stevens. That one says Doolittle on it. So, with that much information, we could determine the lot number, because here's J. Doolittle, and there's the Stevens lot. So the lot was purchased by William Lewis. Looking in the cemetery book, I have the date, which is the next slide. Those 4 blue triangles are the corner markers. So having a name and a lot number, the lot was purchased in 1899 by William Lewis, but we don't have cemetery records other than lot purchase for that time frame. But what I did find in the records is that Hannah C. and William A. Lewis are both buried on that lot. If you look at their lot, the logbook, you'll see they both were brought in from Athens, Pennsylvania. There's no headstones for them. Given the fact that what we surmise of the family, they moved around. When the parents died, because they had purchased this large lot, they were sent up here, but no one had inclination or reason or possibly funding to put up the headstones for them. They had put the one for Miles. I started looking further to find out the rest of the story. The newspaper index that the Historical Society has done had Miles, M-I-L-E-S, Lewis, with an obituary or a piece in August 19th, 1899. The newspaper is 2 days after when Mr. Lewis bought the lot. Excuse me. And we find out the rest of the story, which is that the 12-year-old Miles was playing in the feed mill in Van Loo's Corners. For anybody, does anybody here not know where Van Loo's is? Okay, it's 96 at Potter Road. Van Loo's is considered, I believe, the east part of east of 96. Proudy's, the new bar, is on the west side, but that is all part of Van Loo's. So Miles was playing in near whatever the feed bin and fell in. And it does note that the burial was at Farmer. 1899, we're still Farmer. So now we know the rest of the story on ghost number 1. Ghost number 2, Joseph Patrick. And the question was asked of me, where can we put the headstone? Joseph Patrick served in the Civil War. We have a bit of information on him, the family does. They wanted to know where on lot 701 could they put him. On that lot, there was the headstone for Susanna and Castleton. The cemetery records have both Joseph Sr. and Joseph Jr., and then the family said, yes, when we think that Joseph's wife, Mary, is also buried on the lot. There's her death certificate, and right down here it says she's being buried in Interlaken, and the date she was being buried. So we knew he belonged on that lot. The question is, where do you put him on the lot? According to tradition, and no musical people need to start singing that song. The southwest corner, which is this one right down here, I've marked east and north for you. The southwest corner is traditionally, and I can't find very many lots at the cemetery where it doesn't follow that pattern, that is what I'm calling the father and mother, the patriarch and matriarch. They are buried such that when they stand up, they're facing east. He's on her right as they stood in front of the minister when they got married. So when people say, where do we bury them? That's what we say. Not everybody follows that. Then north of them, so here's the monument, to the north of them are Joseph and his wife Mary, and then up here is Joseph Jr. So we now have what tradition says should be the burial places for them. As I said, Joseph served in the Civil War, and the family would need the information about his Civil War service in order to get a military headstone. This is the 1890 census. New York State is very lucky. We have most of the 1890 census. You go outside of New York and there are very, very few copies. This was all destroyed in a fire. Served in a unit, and the interesting piece down here at the bottom, rupture from gun rolling over him. So, he survived. Knowing what unit he belonged to, you can look him up in the New York State Adjutant General Report, and these are available online. You have to know the unit they served in because each unit has its own report, so you can't just do a universal search. That's why you go to 1890 or someplace else. The top piece there is a quote directly from the Adjutant General's report. The 1890 census and the Adjutant General's information leads you to believe you can probably find a pension record for him, because he would have been getting a disability pension, and depending on who died first, although we know that she died before he did, there probably was pension. With the Civil War headstones, if there is a family headstone that notes the person, you cannot get a VA headstone for him. So when they applied, they had to document, and we signed off as the cemetery, that there was no pre-existing headstone for this Civil War soldier. They received it, it was set, and there's the family monument, there's the monument for Joseph, Mary is here beside him, and then Castleton and Susanna there, and probably the son over there. If you go to the cemetery and you don't, one of the things that plays in a big part, and we'll get to it even more as we go along, is that there are indentations in the ground. And be careful, especially if you go like out to McNeil Cemetery or some of the other older cemeteries. Have your cell phone, make sure somebody knows where you're going. Even when I'm wandering around down here, I have to be very, very careful, because there are sections where there are large woodchuck holes and little tiny monuments that I'm forever tripping over. Safety reasons. Okay, now we come to two widows. Come on. Lucy Robinson Brayman is buried on lot 127. This is out by the front fence and everything. As you can see, hopefully, her husband's date and name are all here. Lucy only has her name. So, when did she die? Would be a good thing to know. And you can see, again, here's the location of the... One of the things that you can go looking at is Find a Grave. It's a wonderful site, but it has limitations. One of the limitations is that it's volunteer information. Families, volunteers, whoever put the information on. And I think you'll agree with me when you look at that, that somehow that looks a little odd. Very odd. The other problem with that record is that, well, in talking about Lucy first, by 1918, we should have a death certificate. She should be in multiple census records, and I would have expected, with her children predeceasing her, that she would be noted in the obituary as being a survivor. These are the children that they list on the Find a Grave site, and there's errors with some of those, especially with Harrison, because the headstone, and therefore what you can see about him, he's only 2 years old, not 23. Oh. And it clearly says on his headstone that he's the son of Gilbert and Lydia. Gilbert and Lydia survived and are buried up in Brockport. I found that information out, but I didn't bother to put it up here. So, what do we really know about Lucy? 1850, she's listed there with her family. 1860, she's still listed with her family, but the oldest daughter now has a husband and 2 children, and some of the children have gone off other places. And Harrison Raymond is not shown with the family because he is working at a neighbor's farm and living at a neighbor's farm, and this is happening up in Romulus. This family liked to move around. (1870), you've got George and Lucy, Emmeline and her one son, and then next door is Hopkins Raymond. George Raymond, father, died in 1876. Son George served in the war, in the Civil War, and died. And in 1880, Lucy, and this is the last census record I can find for her, is living with Hopkins. She's 76 years old. Here's Hopkins' obituary, and it clearly notes he survived, in addition to his wife, he survived by 4 children. This is in 1916. Find a Grave says she didn't die until 18. There's no mention of her in there. This stone is George. As I say, he served in the Civil War, and he was enlisted out of Romulus. If you remember the 1860 census, they are living in Romulus. So George, son of George and Lucy Raymond, he was just discharged for disability in May, and I don't know, I haven't gone looking for any kind of a record. I don't know if he was still in the hospital when he was discharged, or if he stayed in the hospital after he was discharged and died down there, or if he came home and died at home. He is buried at Lakeview Cemetery. Harrison Raymond, because I knew that wasn't the right Harrison, I had to go looking for the right one, and found him down in Pineville, Rapides Parish of Louisiana. He had enlisted, he was captured, died of disease, and is buried down in Texas. So we now know what happened to him as well. So we have Lucy. I would presume that she died between 1880, when we have her definitely around, and 1894. The reason I say 1894 is that we have the 1894 Seneca County Directory, and she's not listed in there as a widow, either on her own or living with one of her children. She would have been listed. The only possible reason she wouldn't be is that I don't know, and Walt, you may know, the 1894 business directory may not have listed all the inmates at Willard, but they were listed in the 1900 and the 1910 census.
What about the state census? 1885, 18...
We don't have 1885, I don't believe. The ghosts are with us. We have 1905, but I don't believe I've ever seen an 1885. We've got 1880, but she's not listed in the 1905 one. No death record, and again, those were kept beginning in about 1882, and we know by later 1880s they were definitely being kept. There's been no death record found for her, nor has there been an obituary. We didn't have Facebook back then, and we all know that Alta Boyer is 107 years old because it's been recorded. If Lucy Raymond was 113 or whatever, I would certainly expect to find a notice of it in the obituaries. Just a quick summary about her children, who they married, their names. I don't need to read all of that to you.
It's probably in the family Bible someplace.
If there is one.
Yeah.
Because they don't even mention her in the Covert book, because the daughter Cynthia married James Covert, who was also a Civil War veteran. He joined in Romulus with the rest of the Raymond boys. And she's not mentioned as Cynthia's mother in the covert book. I don't believe. I looked that up. I didn't make a copy of it for here. So-
That's what-
Our second widow is Mrs. James Nivison, and this lot is right next door to the Raymond lot. She doesn't even have her name on there. So we do not know, looking at the cemetery stone, who Mrs. Nivison is. We know that he died in 1876. Going back to 1870, we have the covert census record, James, Maria, Addie, and probably a laborer or whatever, John Porter. So now we have a name for her, and it was easy enough to go looking up in the newspaper index and find the obituary for her. So not only do we have all of that information, we also have her maiden name, which is always nice. So that was an easy ghost. Our next ghost is Isaac Miller. As most of us probably do if we've done our genealogy, may well have a ghost or two in your family. Isaac Miller is my ghost. He is my great-grandfather, and I cannot find anything about him. I only found one reference that was Mimi Miller's father's name. So, whenever I come across an Isaac Miller, I have to at least do a little bit of searching. In this case, we have, I was going to bring a copy of that poem with me for tonight, but I didn't. In 1880, the Civil War soldiers had written for Memorial Day, one of them wrote this long poem about all of the men from the area, from farmer area, that had died during the war or since the war. And the first part of it is all of the local gentlemen. And I transcribed this and added additional notes and posted it on both the cemetery and the Historical Society Facebook page a couple years ago. And what I found out is that Isaac Miller, this particular one, died in Salisbury prison. And that's just what they wrote in the poem about him. The top piece is the start of the section where they talk about the men that weren't brought home and everything. So we have this unknown Isaac Miller. Looking him up in the Adjutant General's report, he was in 126 New York, so that's very local. And he died August 1864, Reams Station, Virginia. That's when he was captured. He died in December at Salisbury, North Carolina. Most of our national cemeteries are on Find a Grave. As you read that plaque, that's all we have. And I didn't post on here a picture, but you're looking at an open, empty field that they put put a headstone marker at the beginning of each of these trench rows. That's all we know about him. He's part of 11,000 sailor soldiers that were buried at that location. So, who were his parents? Well, we find out that his father is Jacob. I don't know why. Again, census records, you've got to read them for yourself. His mother is Eliza. He has a sister Sarah, a sister Catherine, and a brother William. 1850. 1860, the family has grown up, moved on, marriages have occurred and whatnot. We find that Jacob Miller purchased lot 117. For anybody that knows the cemetery, this fence right here is Reverend Baszler's. It's a landmark, so that if you wanted to go looking for it, this is very, very rough country because of the sunken graves, the headstones that are partially tipped over, and a lot of woodchuck holes. So Jacob Miller purchased lot 117. He died in 1874. Eliza died in 1887, and there's a copy of her obituary. There are no headstones for Eliza or Jacob. It's the eternal question, why isn't there? And certainly don't ask the question, why doesn't the cemetery put them there? Because we don't have the funds
Right.
to do that. It's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to keep as much and accurate records as we can, so that in the future, if somebody goes asking. The headstone that is shown is for Charles Miller. I haven't been able to figure out whether he's another son or he just happens to be a family member of some sort and he's buried on that lot. But there is very good indication of sunken graves there. If you're looking for sunken graves, snow and leaves are excellent indications, because they'll pile up in that space.
Uh-huh.
I give up. Then we come, Joan, I hope you're on there. Last week, many of you probably saw, if you're on Facebook, Joan Leary Young posted that comment. If you find the ghost of Ada Rappley Walker, ask her where she's buried. There is a challenge. So I got a little more information from Joan and went looking. Supposedly she's buried on the Rappley Circle someplace. No idea. Joan had no idea when she died, where she died. She just knew that back before her dad died, at some point, he had taken her down to the cemetery and said, you know, Mother's buried here. So, lot 711 is where William Ford Rappley is buried. There are 11 listed burials there in the cemetery records. The entire Rappley Circle has 48 names, and we'll get to that after we finish up with Ada. Census records. 1900, she's listed with her father Porter Hall and her mother Claudine, or Claudia, however you want to read that one. And she's 17 years old. In 1905, she's with her parents, also with her husband Dana Walker and Ray F. Walker. So we know that in 1905 that she's there. I found her parents' obituaries. Her mother died in 1908. Her father died in 1915 out in California. And there's no comment and nothing in the cemetery books that he ever was brought back here. He's buried out there in California someplace. Her mother is indeed buried here. So, what was found and what was not found? No record was found in the cemetery logbook beginning in December of 1917 of a burial for her under any name. No census records were found in 1920 or 1930. And going to FultonHistory.com, there were no hits for Ada E. Walker, which is what the census records were listing her as. I did find in January 1917 a record that she sold land here in Covert to her uncle. So we have her alive in 1917, in January. What I did find is there is a very visible indentation beside her mother at the cemetery. This is where the sixth sense comes in. I could not find her under Ada E, but I put into Fulton Ada Hall Walker, and there's her obituary. July 30th, she died on the 26th of July, 1917. Our cemetery record begins in December. So, thank you, Joan. I hope you're happy that your grandmother's noted and at rest. And again, it's on my to-do list for tomorrow to make a find a grave entry with all of this information and everything else for Ada. It was fun. I love the challenge of digging into the records and then even more so the victory of finding the answer. So there is, and then this other row of stones here, going back to tradition. This one is W. Ford Rappley. This is his wife, Sarah. This is Mrs. Hall. There's Ada. And then out here on the end of the lot is J. Rappley. He was a bachelor, never married, so they just tucked him out at the end of the family row. Next door, or as part of the Rappley lot, are all those Rappley kids. If you've seen the Rappley monument, it's huge. It's got writing on all four sides of it. You can't miss it. It's another of those landmarks. It lists Ansel Rappley and his wife and all of their children, and down here at the bottom is A. Ford. And then you have this group of headstones. Here we get away from tradition because that is Ansel's headstone, that's his wife's. 3, 4, 5, and 6 are their children. Look at the dates the children died. Does anything strike you about it? And John S. isn't even Ansel's son, he belongs to his brother. Remember when the lands were purchased. The Rappley circle is right here. So it was purchased either in 1860 or 1865, and you find a list of 4 children. When they moved the burials, trivia information, when they moved the burials from the South Cemetery Association and possibly other locations, sometimes they moved the headstone and couldn't move the burial because by that point it had disintegrated quite a bit. They did not even attempt to move those that had died of something contagious. They felt that that would be just spreading the germs. So they were able to move a lot of the headstones. Nope, I didn't. Okay. So those children may or may not be there, but the neat way the row is, and very little indication of any indentation in that whole section, I suspect the kids weren't. Or maybe they put them all together. My last ghost is Jacobus Rappley, and my intent here is to lay him to rest. He never existed.
Wow.
This is that Rappley family mess. It all began with the Sons of the American Revolution, and the one person wanted to get into the SAR. Had to be in the SAR. But there was no relative. So what he did is he took and merged his own ancestor with a soldier from New Jersey, because they were both from New Jersey, and he said, oh, that was just Grandpa's nickname. Everybody called him Jacobus. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had over the years and emails from people wanting the rest of that genealogy, and I have to explain to them he did not exist. They just made him up so they could get him into. So, in 1895, the family and some of the other distinguished men of the community had a service down at the cemetery. They placed this plaque and perpetuated what was started as, total falsehood. The quote on the top of the book here is from the Colbert family. Both Fisher and Pat Patterson wrote about which family members perpetuated it, who started it, and just saying it's false. There's nothing, no documentation that it ever happened. The marker itself, when I was talking with Bob Doan about it back in 95, 96, whatever. He agreed with me that the fact that there was no burial, that the man never existed, that the marker should not be at the cemetery. We put it in the storage area of the cemetery, so it's still there, but it does not belong as a visual reminder or whatever. So, and it's been, I will say, a few years since I've had any of those phone calls. So I think especially with the internet, people have realized that the man did not exist. Having said all of that, just a reminder, more for our online people, that this is Historical Society. This is our work, my work, and if you use any of it, please give us credit. Facebook Live, if you want to go home and rewatch it on Facebook, you can do so, and we'll soon have it up on our YouTube channel for the Historical Society. Welcome questions, especially now that I'm all done talking. So I wish you all a safe Halloween and safe and enjoyable ghost hunting. Let me put a light on and then we'll...
Thank you very much, Diane.
Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So where were, you were talking about those children all having been moved, so where was the
The church.
cemetery that they were moved to?
They were, it's northwest of the Baptist Church.
So, but there's no evidence that it was?
There's no evidence there. By now, the fields have been plowed over so many times that anything that was there is disintegrated. And anybody else, any other? If not, feel free to look at the books, the old cemetery records, the ones that have got, and a lot of those have information on cemetery things. I know the snippet book, I wrote about the cemetery and a lot of the people many times. Covert history, any of those are back there. There's also, if you don't have a copy of it already, the copy of our newsletter and a membership form. We're always looking. And again, if you're not a member, maybe you are, you have a family member out of town, it's a great Christmas present. It keeps on giving all year round. So I believe there's cider in the hallway.
Yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you.